This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a rivalry that, well, it didn't just define ancient Greece, did it? It seems it secretly orchestrated one of the biggest power shifts in Western history.
That's right. We're talking about the collapse of the medieval order, the birth of modern independent reason. It's a huge claim.
It really is. And the core idea from these sources is that this wasn't just philosophy in a vacuum. It was a 2,000-year-old argument between Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah, his star student, no less. And the argument, this tension between their worldviews, apparently became the main ideological battleground. Popes, kings, scientists, they all got drawn in.
So our mission today is to follow that thread, that tension. How did the Platonic view, inward looking, focused on transcendent ideas versus the Aristotelian view, outward, physical, concrete, how did they get weaponized?
Across 1,000 years of history. It's quite the story.
Let's start at the beginning then, the ancient roots. What's the fundamental difference we need to grasp?
Okay, so Plato and thinkers like Augustine who followed him in the West basically said the idea or the form, that's the real reality.
Right, the physical world we see, that's just a shadow, imperfect.
Exactly. So truth is found by looking inward or, upward towards the spiritual. It's an internal quest.
But Aristotle, the great organizer, he looked out, not in.
He did. He was all about observed reality, specific things, individuals, as he called them. Physical cause and effect, order in this world.
So for him, truth wasn't about gazing at some perfect ideal.
No, it was about rigorously examining the messy, tangible world right here. And interestingly, his system really took root early on, not so much in the West initially, but in the Eastern Roman and Islamic empires.
That geographical split is crucial, isn't it? People like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, they preserved Aristotle, built on him.
Yeah, they gave their civilizations this incredibly comprehensive, logical way to explain the physical universe. Meanwhile, the West, after Rome fell,
well, struggling a bit, intellectually speaking.
kind of patching things together, pretty much. And even before that big collision of ideas, the West was having its own little spark, the Carolingian Renaissance, 8th, 9th centuries.
But the sources stress this wasn't just artists finding patrons. This was Charlemagne needing to run an empire.
Absolutely. Pure political necessity. He had this huge, sprawling territory. How do you stabilize that?
You need common ground and people who can actually manage things.
Exactly. He needed unified faith. That's one pillar. And crucially, he needed educated officials and clergy. People to do the admin, run the show.
Enter Alcuin of York, the knowledge designer, as the sources put it.
Right. He comes from this highly regarded school in York, gets recruited by Charlemagne, sets up the Palatine School, and he standardizes the curriculum, the 7 liberal arts.
Which becomes the model for, well, basically Western education for centuries.
It really does. But here's the key thing about this early phase, this early scholasticism up through Anselm in the 11th century. It was overwhelmingly Platonic, Augustinian, really.
Why? Because it kept reason on a leash.
Pretty much. It was safe. The whole approach was fides quaerens intellectum, faith-seeking understanding.
So reason is okay as long as it just helps you understand what you already believe by faith?
Precisely. Reason was like a tool, but only used within the existing framework of faith. Craftable, contained, inward-looking, like Plato.
Okay, but comfort zones don't usually last in history. What shattered this?
Well, the West kind of crashed into the rest of the world, didn't it? The Crusades, and maybe even more importantly, the translation movement in Toledo, Spain, around the 12th century.
Ah, so knowledge starts flooding in.
A tidal wave. Suddenly, the West gets access to the complete works of Aristotle, preserved and crucially developed by Islamic scholars like Avicenna and Averroes.
Averroes, Ibn Rushd.
Right. And the sources describe this as just an incredible shock. Europe had been working with philosophical scraps, and suddenly they're handed this fully formed system. Logic, physics, ethics, metaphysics, the works.
Wow. I can imagine. You've got generations relying on faith and inner light, and then, bam, this external logical system lands on your desk.
And the forces really emphasized this point. European thinkers were apparently stunned. They felt that what they grasped through faith, the Islamic world, seemed to have actually proven through reason.
That's more than a shock. That's a direct challenge to the entire basis of authority, isn't it?
Absolutely. It forced a massive choice. Do you reject this incredibly powerful logical toolkit and risk, becoming irrelevant? Or do you try to integrate it and risk blowing up your whole theological understanding?
Okay, so that's the stage set for Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. He can't just ignore Aristotle.
No, ignoring it wasn't really an option by then. So Aquinas steps in and performs this amazing feat of intellectual architecture.
What does he do? How does he handle this dangerous new knowledge?
He absorbs it. He takes the Islamic Aristotelian framework and essentially uses it to build, as the sources call it, philosophical armor for Christian theology.
Armor. Okay, so he's using Aristotle to defend Christianity.
Yes, he creates this harmonization model. The idea is reason serves faith. They can work together, but faith is always superior. Reason is subordinate. He sort of domesticated Aristotle, made him safe for the church.
But you can't really domesticate reason, can you? It tends to wander off.
Well, exactly. The tension didn't go away. It boiled over pretty quickly, actually, leading to that famous or infamous 1277 condemnation in Paris.
Right, where they banned a whole load of
A
ideas.
specific load, 219 propositions linked to Aristotle and Averroes.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a general warning. It was like a surgical strike against certain lines of thought.
219. That feels oddly precise. Was that just panic, like bishops grabbing every edgy book they could find? Or was it really targeted at, say, the University of Paris, where these ideas were buzzing?
The sources suggest it was probably a bit of both. The precision suggests a careful, maybe even desperate review of what was being taught. They were identifying specific statements that seemed dangerous.
Dangerous how? What was the core fear?
The fear was that reason, especially Aristotelian logic applied to nature, might suggest that everything, maybe even God himself, had to follow logical or natural laws, that reason could judge revelation.
Ah, so reason might set itself up as superior to faith, the exact opposite of the Aquinas model.
Exactly. Implied reason could operate independently, maybe even contradict church teaching that threatened the whole structure. So, yeah, it looks like a calculated attempt by Rome to shut down that potential independence bubbling up, especially in Paris. But, the genie was kind of out of the bottle.
And that intellectual tension, that genie, finally breaks out in a huge political way in 1517, Luther, the Reformation.
Suddenly, the philosophical split, Plato versus Aristotle, or maybe Augustine versus Aquinas by this point, becomes a real-world political and military fault line right across Europe.
How did that alignment work? Who sided with whom?
Well, the Catholic Church had basically committed itself to Aquinas, right? So it strongly upheld Thomism and that Aristotelian ideal of a hierarchical, external, observable order.
Which mirrored their own structure.
Perfectly. A universal church, a divinely ordained hierarchy on earth, reflecting that perfect, ordered cosmos that Aristotle via Aquinas described. Centralized, systematic.
Okay, so if the Catholics are Team Aristotle Aquinas,
Then the Protestant movement swings back hard towards the Augustinian or Platonic inward focus. They champion solidified faith alone.
individual faith, the direct relationship between the individual soul and God, bypassing the need for that big hierarchical structure.
Exactly. The emphasis is on internal conviction, not external mediation through the church hierarchy.
So it sounds less like a debate about theology and more like, well, a constitutional crisis wearing religious robes.
That's a great way to put it. The political alignment becomes really stark. The Catholic side has the Holy Roman Emperor, Spain, the big centralized powers, all backing that ideal of universal Turk authority, that Aristotelian order.
Hold on. Why Aristotle specifically for centralized power? I mean, he talked about physics, logic.
It's the idea of system and hierarchy. Aristotle categorized everything, species, governments, causes, purposes. His whole philosophy implies a structured, ordered reality.
Ah, I see. So if God's creation is this perfect external hierarchy that you can observe and classify,
Then God's church must also be a perfect, external, centralized hierarchy. It provides the philosophical justification for that kind of top-down authority.
okay, that makes the Protestant alignment much clearer. They're backed by.
By the German princes, the free cities, the decentralizing forces. For them, Protestantism, with its focus on the individual's inner faith, that Platonic echo wasn't just about salvation.
It was an ideology of independence.
Absolutely. Political and economic independence from Rome and the emperor. They used the individual soul argument to justify breaking away, to justify local sovereignty.
Which all leads to that pivotal moment in 1555, the Peace of Augsburg.
Yeah, and that wasn't really a resolution, was it? It was a political compromise and a pretty devastating one for the emperor and the Catholic side.
It enshrined the principle cuius regio, ius religio, whose realm, his religion.
Which basically means the local ruler decides the religion of their territory. The emperor effectively had to concede religious control and therefore a huge chunk of sovereignty to these princes.
That must have felt like the end of an era for Rome, the end of universal Catholic authority.
It really was. The sources frame it as the death knell for Catholic universalism, which was tied so closely to that Aristotelian hierarchical ideal, and it marks the rise of the sovereign nation-state as we know it.
Okay, so a massive political defeat for the Catholic Aristotelian side. That explains the next move, just 12 years later in 1567.
The Catholic Church formally adopts Thomism, Aquinas' system, as its official standard theology.
Which sounds defensive, like circling the wagons.
The sources call it strategic rearmament. Facing collapse, they needed to project intellectual strength and consistency.
So if the Protestants are all about subjective, individual faith,
The Catholics double down on objective, systematic reason, Aristotle's reason, as filtered through Aquinas. They could claim philosophical rigor, even if that reason had to ultimately bow to revealed faith controlled by Rome. It was a power play, asserting intellectual authority.
but talk about bad timing, they're doubling down on Aristotle just as his view of the universe is about to get blown apart.
Exactly. Enter challenger number 3, science. Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo.
And they're not just tweaking the model, they're fundamentally challenging the Aristotelian cosmos, right? The whole geocentric perfect spheres thing.
Which was the literal physical foundation supporting the Thomistic Catholic worldview. If Aristotle was wrong about the heavens, the very structure of God's creation.
Then maybe the perfect hierarchy of the church built on that model was also questionable.
Precisely. The stakes were incredibly high. And you see this immediately in how the scientific debate becomes political.
Yeah.
Look at the fates of the astronomers.
Right, the contrast is stark. Galileo is working in Italy, Catholic heartland.
And he gets prosecuted in 1633. Why? Because his observations, his reason, weren't just seen as an astronomical update, they were perceived as a direct threat to the established order.
A threat to the Thomistic system the church had just officially adopted.
Meanwhile, Johannes Kepler, up in Protestant Germany, making equally revolutionary claims.
He's protected by the Protestant princes who are already challenging Rome's authority.
So astronomy itself becomes this philosophical weapon in the ongoing religious and political wars. In Catholic lands, independent reason looks like rebellion.
But in Protestant lands, it looks more like exploration, maybe even compatible with that individualistic spirit of challenging old dogma.
Exactly. Which perfectly sets the stage for the next big intellectual shift, what the sources call the triumph of subjective reason. We need to talk about Descartes.
René Descartes. Culturally Catholic, but philosophically something else.
Yeah, the sources say he adopts a fundamentally Protestant mentality in his philosophy. He starts with radical doubt, distrusting the external shared reality that Aristotle and Aquinas relied on.
He famously shifts the foundation of truth inward, doesn't he?
Completely. It's not about observing the world anymore. It's about internal subjective certainty. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Truth starts inside the individual mind.
That feels like a massive break from the Thomistic view, almost a return to Augustine's internal light, but secularized.
That's a great way to think about it. It's a powerful return to that inward focus, but grounded in individual reason, not necessarily divine illumination.
And this inward turn doesn't stop with Descartes. It gets picked up and amplified, particularly in Germany.
Right. By the German idealists Kant, Fichte, Hegel. And it's probably no coincidence they mostly came from Lutheran Protestant backgrounds.
What did they do with Descartes' starting point?
They essentially took that inward focus, that legacy of Luther's individual faith, and built an entire philosophical system around it. Rational idealism, reason, originating within the subject, becomes the ultimate arbiter of reality.
This sounds like the final stage of the overthrow you mentioned earlier.
It really is. And the sources offer this incredibly neat, almost chilling summary of the whole 1,000-year shift. Think about the intellectual hierarchy. In the medieval period, under Aquinas.
It was theology first, then philosophy, then the sciences way down at the bottom.
Exactly. Theology, philosophy, sciences. God's revealed truth was supreme.
And in the modern era, after this idealist revolution pioneered by people like Hegel,
It flips completely. Philosophy, theology, sciences.
wow. Philosophy basically absorbs theology, claims the top spot. Independent human reason is now king.
That simple flip represents the culmination of this centuries-long struggle. It's a victory of reason, initially sparked by Plato's inward focus, then fueled by political desires for independence, and finally codified by philosophy itself.
Okay, but hang on. Was all of modern thought a rejection of Aristotle? Did his way of thinking just disappear?
No, not at all. That's a crucial point.
Mm-hmm.
While continental philosophy took that idealist sort of Neoplatonic path.
There was another major strand developing, right?
Absolutely. British empiricism, think Locke, Hume, is a direct continuation of the Aristotelian method.
How so?
Their starting point is the opposite of Descartes. Knowledge doesn't begin with innate ideas in the mind. It begins with sensory experience, observation of the external world.
Back to Aristotle's focus on concrete reality.
Precisely. Grounded in experience. And you can trace this Aristotelian thread even further right into modern American philosophies, specifically pragmatism.
Pure Stewie.
Yeah. Their focus on what works, on practical consequences, on phronesis or practical wisdom that's very Aristotelian. It's about purpose, action, and results in the real world, not abstract ideals.
So the ancient split really did echo down through the centuries, creating these two distinct paths in modern thought.
It seems so. The Platonic line leading to idealism and perhaps continental philosophy, and the Aristotelian line leading to empiricism and pragmatism.
Okay, so let's try to pull this incredible arc together for you, the listener. It starts with Plato and Aristotle. Their different approaches, inward ideal versus outward reality, dividing even the early church.
Then, the rediscovery of Aristotle through Islamic scholarship gives the West this powerful intellectual engine, scholasticism, championed by Aquinas. But that very system also reinforces the hierarchical order that new powers want to break free from.
Right. Then comes the political conflict. The Reformation cleverly weaponizes these philosophical traditions. Catholic hierarchy aligns with the Aristotelian model, while Protestant individualism resonates with the Platonic Augustinian inward focus.
But it wasn't really about the philosophy itself for the politicians, was it? It was ideological cover.
Exactly. The rising powers, the German princes, the free cities, they needed justification. They used both the individualist theology of Protestantism for political freedom and the new empirically driven science, which challenged the old Aristotelian cosmos for economic and technological advantage.
It was a two-pronged attack on the old medieval order. And the ultimate driver, according to these sources, wasn't philosophy or even theology in the end.
It was about sovereignty, shifting power from an authority based on God's order to one based on the individual, the nation-state, and eventually what the sources call market order.
The intellectual war provided the narrative, the justification for that fundamental transfer of power.
Which leaves us with a really interesting final thought to chew on. The scientific method itself, rigorous observation, classification, logic of logic, it has deep roots in Aristotle. He was the master systematizer.
Yet, ironically, the scientific revolution had to push past the very Aristotelian framework that the church had frozen in place as dogma. They had to break Aristotle's authority to fulfill his empirical spirit in a way.
So the question for you is this. When you look at the big intellectual breakthroughs happening today, whether it's in AI, genetics, ethics, whatever.
What's driving them? Is it more Platonic, the pursuit of some radical new ideal, something that transcends our current reality and forces us to reimagine everything?
Or is it more Aristotelian, a focus on meticulously observing the actual world we have and finding practical ways to understand, manage, and improve it right now?
Which kind of thinking, which ancient ghost, is really guiding our modern quest for truth? Is it the pull towards the perfect form or the push to master the concrete world?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.